And now joining us now is Samson Itodo of Yaga Africa, who's been monitoring elections in the West African nation. Thank you very much, Samson, for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we understand that tallying of votes is on right now, but how would you assess Saturday's election?
Well, Saturday's election was peaceful, and Sierra Leoneans showed up in their numbers to cast their vote for a candidate of their choice. The election was organized within a context of deep polarization and mistrust for the Electoral Commission, as well as the security agencies upholding the principles of non-partisanship and professionalism in the management of election security operations. But to a large extent, the election was peaceful, but with some challenges. There were logistical issues that we observed related to voter identification, because there are some people who showed up to vote, but they were unable to vote. There were also logistical issues, the late delivery of materials that led to late commencement of elections in some regions. But on the whole, we'll say it's been a peaceful election. Just a few minutes ago, the first set of results have been announced, by the chair of the Electoral Commission in a nationwide press conference just about 15 to 20 minutes ago, where about 60% of provisional results, have been announced, and the tallying process is on. Well, in the build-up to the election, the chair of the commission did set 72 hours as a time for declaring the final results, even though the legal framework for the elections that governs elections in Sierra Leone requires that the Electoral Commission should declare winner within 10 days after the date of the polls. But we have seen an announcement of provisional results, and so far, the entire country is peaceful. But in your preliminary remark, you referenced an incident that happened yesterday about the attack on the opposition party's office, quite unwarranted. And we hope that they will continue to maintain the peace, and state forces, will uphold the peace and not use the apparatus of power to intimidate opposition parties and candidates. But on the whole, the entire country, I would say, is relatively peaceful, and the people of Sierra Leone are waiting on the Electoral Commission to conclude the tallying process, which to a large extent has elicited concerns, from election observers, both domestic and international, because to a large extent there are questions as to the transparency of the process from the district to the regional as well as the national level.
But we're hearing of an attack on the opposition headquarters. Can you confirm this, and how tense is the atmosphere now? I mean, because election is already taking place. However, with this wait and all of that, the wait is another key process that determines transparency or accountability of the ballots.
Well, it does raise concerns. And as I mentioned earlier, that in the build-up to this election, there were controversies, there were intrigues, and there were a lot of debates as to whether the election should hold at the time. There were several issues that the opposition party raised in relation to the conduct of the Electoral Commission. In fact, the opposition party had called for the resignation of the chair of the Electoral Commission as well as the national commissioners. There were several mediating efforts, to address some of the concerns that they have about the voters' register, about the procedure, for the tallying of the results. One of such issues that they raised was that this is the first time that in an election, in the tallying centers, there are no projectors to project the results as they are being entered into the Electoral Commission's results management database. And this has further deepened, the suspicion that stakeholders have. And the Electoral Commission should have, ensured that there's some high level of transparency, because the antidote, to mistrust The antidote to suspicion is transparency, greater transparency and more transparency. But if you look at the benchmarks for measuring whether a results management process, it's transparent, I would say, based on our observation, the Electoral Commission should have done more to inspire confidence on the part of the stakeholders on the results management process. But currently, it's very closed and people are just waiting. Like I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, the chair of the commission has declared provisional results. And he has said that the final results will be announced within 48 hours. And so far, so good. The whole country is peaceful. We pray it remains peaceful. But we should also, call on the state actors to refrain from engaging in provocative actions that would lead or provoke any form of street action from the opposition parties or from political stakeholders. Another troubling trend is that both political parties, right from yesterday or Saturday afternoon, have been claiming victory. And some claim landslide victory, issuing statements and declaring themselves winner in total violation of the legal framework for the elections. And as observers, we've called on the stakeholders, to refrain from doing that. It's only the Electoral Commission that is in a position to declare or announce a winner. Whether there will be a runoff or the ballot will be concluded on first ballot, because the Constitution requires that a candidate must secure 55% of the vote. If none of the candidates meet that threshold, then we will head to a runoff, just like it was done in the previous election.
All right, now how would you compare the landscape in this election in Sierra Leone and that of Nigeria's general election in February and March this year?
Well, to a large extent, if you remove just the names of the country and substitute it with Nigeria, we share a lot of commonalities in this entire process. The level of polarization was same for Nigeria, where issues around ethnicity did shape, how the entire elections went. I would say when it comes to religion, it's not playing a critical role for this particular election. The second commonality is the context for the election, the socioeconomic context. Sierra Leone is grappling, a lot of economic challenges ranging from increased debts, a very weak economy that saw citizens move to the streets to protest, the cost of living, access to basic and social amenities. This was also Nigeria in the build-up to the elections. A weak economy, there were job losses, our debt rate was on a high increase, inflation was also very, very high. And so the contexts are quite similar. If you look at election management, it's also the same thing. There were logistical challenges, there were issues relating to who gets to vote. So it's very similar to the Nigerian context. But there are lessons.
I guess we'll have to end it there because of time, but thank you very much for your time. Samson Itodo of Yaga Africa has been monitoring elections in the West African nation. Thank you, and we'll definitely be getting more details from you later.
Thank you.